This Global National podcast is brought to you in part by Ford Fusion. Create a reaction. Tonight on Global National.
The clearest and bleakest picture yet of our planet's future. The warning map of a path to destruction. British sailors described their abduction by Iran.
They rammed our boats and trained their heavy machine guns, RPG and weapons on us.
What they couldn't say when they were captive. And the valor and sacrifice that still inspires the people of Vimy, France today, while this man struggles for recognition of the everyday heroes of war.
Canada's most watched national newscast, Global National, with Kevin Newman.
Hello and thank you for joining us on this Good Friday. As Christians everywhere mark the day of the crucifixion, there is a warning of dark days on the horizon coming from a major global warming conference in Belgium. Our coverage begins in the warmest place in Canada right now, southern BC, in the high teens, where Jazz Johal has details for us. Jazz.
Kevin, it's the strongest statement to date by the UN. Its own climate change panel, after months of internal bickering, are now predicting the impacts of global warming are a lot more dire than first thought. The sobering study predicts heightened threats of flooding and coastal erosion. According to the climate report, the consequences of global warming couldn't be more stark. 30% of species threatened with extinction. Billions of people, mostly in the third world, threatened with water shortages, and hundreds of millions stricken with hunger. The findings from 2,500 scientists around the world paints an apocalyptic view of the impacts of carbon dioxide pollution. It's the most thorough study ever done on climate change, one that predicts the Earth's temperature could rise an average of 4 degrees this century.
Is the poorest of the poor in the world, and this includes poor people even in prosperous societies, who are going to be the worst hit and who are the most vulnerable.
The report urged governments to act fast to help stabilize climate change. For the first time, scientists broke down their predictions by region. In Europe, the climate panel says alpine glaciers will disappear. The impact can already be seen at Swiss ski resorts, which have suffered through a lack of snow this year. Africa will be hardest hit, with 250 million people expected to be exposed to water shortages by 2050. In some African countries, food production could fall by half. In Asia, there are threats of massive flooding and avalanches from melting Himalayan glaciers.
There's a momentum in the system. It's like a juggernaut, a very fast train, and there's nothing we can do to stop a certain amount of that change.
It's not just the third world. North America will be hit with more hurricanes, floods, and wildfires. Canadians will be forced to deal with declining water quality, severe heat waves, and waterborne illnesses like West Nile virus. Even with such dire predictions, scientists accuse some of the world's biggest polluters of watering down the report. China and the U.S. lobbied to tone down the certainty of some of the more dire predictions. Scientists now hope today's findings will force heavy polluters and Canada, which has backed away from the Kyoto Agreement, to join an international effort to combat carbon emissions. The final report will be presented to Canada and other G8 countries in June, in hopes it'll impact government policy in years to come. Kevin.
All right, Jazz, thanks very much. Well, reaction to the report swift. The Conservative government saying in the coming weeks it will announce mandatory targets for reducing greenhouse gases. The Liberal leader saying the government must act more aggressively than it is. The NDP echoing that, calling for a tougher climate act. And the Greens saying they need to study the report more before commenting. Well, the warning of more extreme weather to come hitting close to home in most of Canada today. The calendar says April 6th, the weather more like February 6th. Mike Edgell is following this from a chilly Winnipeg, and he joins us now. Mike.
Kevin, just a couple of weeks ago, people in this part of the country were putting away their heavy jackets, but then Mother Nature started messing with spring. The ice jams in Selkirk, Manitoba have already caused some flooding, and they're keeping residents on edge. But the situation wouldn't be so tense in the first place if a recent cold snap hadn't refrozen the ice.
The cold weather has cemented all these pieces of ice together now, and what we have is a stationary ice jam at PTH number 4.
In many Canadian cities, it's unseasonably cold. New Brunswick got snow yesterday, and today Calgary got flurries. It dropped to minus 16 this morning with the wind chill. In Barrie, north of Toronto, drivers were weary. and children were treated to a Christmas-like Easter egg hunt.
We didn't have the snow for Christmas, we got the snow for Easter. It's getting mixed up.
I'm not crazy about it.
I don't know what I did on the weather gods.
It was typically sunny in Winnipeg this morning, but 15 degrees below the 30-year April average.
It's too cold for Easter. It should be way warmer by now. We came down actually just to see the ice jams here.
Keeps the bugs down.
I'd like to have better, but you haven't got it, so put up with what we got.
Meteorologists say the brisk winds come from the north.
First of all, we've got a big pile of cold air that's been sitting over in northern Manitoba and the Northwest Territories. And secondly, we had a big weather system last 3-4 days ago that brought all of that cold air down on top of us.
Environment Canada says the next 3 months will be hot and cold depending on where you live. In the west, below normal temperatures. The same on the east coast. In Saskatchewan and Manitoba, normal temps. And in much of Ontario, warmer than normal. But not quite yet. Little relief over the weekend. The temperature in most Canadian cities tomorrow will hover around 0, except Vancouver, around 19. Must be nice. Kevin?
All right, Mike. Well, there's a guest room. Come visit anytime. Well, off the coast of Greece today, that cruise ship that ran aground yesterday with about 60 Canadian students aboard has now sunk, and search divers are looking for 2 missing people. The French tourists, a father and daughter, couldn't be located before the ship sank, 15 hours after hitting a reef. While the rest of the roughly 1,600 passengers and crew got off safely, many are describing a chaotic situation on board the ship.
The water was up over my ankles, so I ran fast as I could, of course, up to the 5th level to see if my wife was all right. When I got to the 5th level, nobody on the 5th level knew that the boat was taking on water.
We heard a big shudder, and then the whole boat started to tilt. All of our glasses were sliding everywhere, and our warning that the ship was sinking was some of the staff running down the corridor screaming out life jackets and banging on doors.
Well, other witnesses also described panicking crew members unsure of what to do as the ship began sinking. Investigators are now questioning the captain and 3 officers. In Britain, the curtain finally lifted on the other side of the standoff that brought that country and Iran to the brink. For the first time, we are hearing the events described by the British sailors and Marines without being under personal threat, and they're quite different. Here's Eric Sorensen.
Today they spoke, and a new picture emerged of the ordeal faced by 15 British Marines and sailors. First, the seizure. The video supplied by Iran, brief, everything calm. The British say in reality 8 heavily armed boats manned by unstable, angry Iranians surrounded and rammed their boats. The mothership, HMS Cornwall, too far away to help.
It was at this point that we realized that had we resisted, there would have been a major fight, one which we could not have won, and with consequences that would have major strategic impacts.
And had they fought back?
And many of us would not be standing here today.
Next, the captivity. Innocuous pictures from Iraq belie what really happened. The Britons say they were stripped and given pajamas, isolated, interrogated, not physically but psychologically tortured.
When we first went to the prison, we were put up against the wall, hands bound, blindfolded, and that people were cocking weapons in the background, which, as you can imagine, was an extremely nerve-wracking occasion.
Conspicuously absent from the news conference, the lone woman sailor. Faye Turney was not only isolated, but told by her captors the rest had been freed. She wrote letters and apologized. Her colleagues came to her defense today.
She coped admirably and retained a lot of dignity and has maintained that throughout.
As for the 2 commanders' admissions transmitted worldwide,
which is inside Iranian territorial waters,
apparently edited. Their persistent disclaimers were not broadcast.
At all times, we stuck to our guns and we said, no, we were conducting our operations legally.
Still, the British military is investigating their conduct, how the seizure came about, and what should and should not be said in captivity. Officially, they bear the Iranians no ill will. Their real feelings?
As far as I'm concerned, the whole thing was a complete media stunt, and I've got nothing else to say really. I'm not their biggest fan, put it that way.
Late today, Iran responded, declaring, without irony, that this was theatrical propaganda. In Washington, this is Global National's Eric Sorensen reporting.
Well, back in this country now, the Easter long weekend goes a little longer for members of Parliament. They have one more week in their ridings before the Commons resumes. And when it does, we expect we'll know more about the Conservatives' election plans. In the meantime, our Ottawa Bureau Chief gives us an inside look at how the Tories are already trying to manipulate the messenger.
En réglant le déséquilibre fiscal.
If you're the Conservative Party and you're about to launch French ads in Quebec attacking Stéphane Dion, how do you get English Canadians to watch those ads? The answer, you get the media to play ball. So you start by inviting reporters to a news conference on a week when Parliament is not sitting, ensuring you'll have a full house of journalists.
I'd like to welcome Mr. Bernier.
Then you play the ads to those journalists, accompanying them with campaign-style speeches delivered with the help of teleprompters.
And we will highlight the choice between strong leadership that delivers real benefits for families and taxpayers versus weak leadership.
It was a carefully scripted event highlighting the attack ads. And to make sure the focus stayed on those ads when the speeches were over, TV reporters were allowed to ask just one question, then their cameras were asked to leave.
We just ask cameras to leave, please.
Now, there's an easy way for the Conservatives to get television newscasts to focus on those ads, and that's by not giving us much else to work with, which is why that briefing is still going on inside, but television cameras have been asked to leave.
Let's take a look at the ad.
In the end, the Tories got their wish. The French ads were aired on English-language television networks, including ours. So, how did the Liberals counterattack against this rollout of the new Tory ads? Well, they're not willing to spend money on ads of their own. That left this lone MP to fight back.
What this really is an opportunity. It's not an opportunity. It's an effort by the Prime Minister of Canada to put up smoke and mirrors and to change the channels, so that Canadians are not focusing on the weaknesses of their policies.
In Ottawa, this is Global National, Jacques Perbeau reporting.
Unlocking one of the many mysteries of the brain. How helping mice remember the way to dry ground could lead to a brain boost for humans as well. Also ahead tonight.
The government didn't provide them with discharge money, with ability to get a job.
He helped his fellow mariners win respect. Now he hopes their sacrifice can be honored too. Our everyday hero is ahead. The narrow streets of Old Jerusalem packed with pilgrims as Christians from around the world descend on the city for Easter ceremonies. Many of them bearing large crosses as they take part in the traditional Stations of the Cross procession, said to retrace the route Jesus took on his way to crucifixion. In Vatican City, Pope Benedict presiding over Good Friday Mass at St. Peter's Basilica. The ceremony traditionally taking place during the same hour in which, according to the Gospels, Christ died on the cross. Well, as with many stories about medical breakthroughs, there needs to be caution attached to the optimism of what's being reported from a group of Montreal researchers today. What they've discovered about the brains of small animals looks promising if it can be replicated in humans. But even the possibility of that has some people hopeful tonight. Here's our health specialist, Jennifer Tryon.
Without the reminder, Brenda Hoonam's medication could be easily forgotten.
Once the medication goes in here, then I don't remember what the medication is.
She's in the early stages of Alzheimer's. Frustration over sudden lapses in her long-term memory happen daily.
All of a sudden you will have a blankness. You'll go to retrieve a thought or a memory and there will just be a blankness there.
But memory loss is a symptom this Montreal researcher intends to put in the past.
We hope that we will be able to rescue the memory impairment associated to the disorder.
And they did. Well, in mice, at least. His team discovered a way to repair damaged proteins in the brain that result in long-term memory loss. Prior to the treatment, the mouse wasn't able to find its way back to the platform. After the treatment, no problem. The memory loss was reversed.
To be able to target one molecule and have an enhancement in memory, I think is a step forward in the understanding the molecular mechanisms by which memory occurs.
The next step is developing a medication that will do the same repair work, but whether that will work in humans, the Alzheimer's Society is keeping close watch.
And Alzheimer's is a lot more than memory loss.
This wouldn't cure the dementia, only potentially reverse the symptom of memory loss.
So if this enhances the memory, it's counteracting the effect of the disease. That's not curing the disease. Curing disease is stopping the things that's causing these things.
So Hunam is sticking with what currently helps, but she still hopes.
I've already kind of blown the statistics out of the water, so you never know. There's always a shade of hope. If you take hope away from us, that might be the only thing we have left. Do I know that it's not going to benefit me? Yes, I do. But that doesn't stop the excitement from being there.
In Toronto, this is Global National's Jennifer Tryon reporting.
90 years later, they still remember how the French, who live at the footsteps of Vimy Ridge, honor the valor and sacrifice of our troops as we continue.
Monday, hearts will be heavy over there. As they did in 1936, world leaders will gather beneath the Vimy Ridge Monument 90 years after the battle. Canada Remembering Canadians. The ceremony on Global National Monday.
The Canadian success at Vimy Ridge marked a profound turning point for the Allies. It was one of the most complete and decisive engagements of the Great War. A year and a half later, World War I was over, but the memory of Vimy has been etched not only in the ground and souls of the soldiers, but also in the gratitude of the descendants of the French citizens who live there. Mike Armstrong is in France for the 90th anniversary ceremonies, and he joins us now. Mike?
Well, Kevin, one of the things we were wondering about before coming here this week was how the locals feel about the anniversary, especially with all the Canadians and other countries coming here. Well, here's an answer for you. This is a special supplement in a local paper this week. Welcome back. Mid-morning, a group of elementary students on a tour of the Beffroi, Arras City Hall. One of the topics, Canada and the First World War. It's worth noting, at this point, the tour guide didn't know we were Canadian. We owe them a lot, he says, because it's to them that we owe the victory at Vimy. Inside City Hall, an exposition, much of it Canadian, uniforms, cap badges. It's a collection by ordinary citizens, like Fabrice Dubuc, remembering a time when the city was surrounded by trenches and artillery. It was a ruined city, he says, completely. Arras suffered horribly in the war. Just kilometers from the front line from 1914 to 1918, it was bombarded by German artillery for 4 years. 95% of the people left or were killed. This is the Beffroi, the city hall after the war. Like most of the town, it was rebuilt. Arras is younger than it looks. The nearby village of Souchy has an honor it'd rather not have. The green medal on the town hall is only given to towns that were completely destroyed in the war. Dominique Gallet lives here. Today he's wearing a Canadian pin. Over the next few days, he's volunteering at Canadian events around the region.
Le devoir de mémoire, c'est très important pour nous.
He says it's important the fallen not be forgotten. He calls it the responsibility of memory. 9 decades later, the scars of the battle aren't homes or buildings in rubble, but they're there. It's monuments and the memorials, some you see from kilometers away, and the cemeteries, British, French, Czechoslovakian, Australian, Canadian, even German. There are 4 Germans for every cross here. The Artois region has dozens of cemeteries, hundreds of thousands of crosses and tombstones.
On est né dedans, hein? Tout le groupe.
We're born into it, Dubuc says. He calls the people here children of that history. Now, there are several festivities in the coming days. The highlight will obviously be the rededication of the monument on Monday, but there are others. On Sunday, Canadian soldiers will parade through the streets of Arras, and then they'll be given the keys to the city. This represents the gates of Arras. As the tour guide put it to us, Canadians that come here are supposed to feel like they're at home. Kevin?
Mike, thanks so much for that. Now, in a moment, the push for recognition by Canadians who didn't see battle, but they risked it all in 2 world wars trying to support our military. The case for recognizing these everyday heroes as Global National continues. So many of our weekly everyday heroes are unsung, underappreciated for all they've done. Tonight's represents thousands of men and women who in many ways have gone under-recognized for the importance of the role they played in winning wars. Not only the first, but the second as well. They sailed the Merchant Marine, supplying soldiers and battleships in the dangerous North Atlantic. Certainly not civilians, but also not fully military. 72 Canadian supply vessels were lost to enemy action in World War II. 1,600 brave sailors perished. Bruce Ferguson manned oil tankers and cargo ships during that war.
I was 16 at that time, so I was a wee bit young. A friend of mine's father had contact with the Furnace Withy Company, which was a shipping company, and he arranged that we could get on a ship. So we did.
When the war ended, there was no real homecoming for merchant mariners. They weren't considered veterans of war and initially received none of the benefits.
The government didn't provide them with discharge money, with ability to get a job, buy a home at a lower rate. None of those things. Send them to universities. They were not available for merchant seamen.
But there were a lot of them, like Bruce, proud of their service to Canada under the old flag, and like tough seamen, not afraid to fight for what's theirs. Over the years, they've come together to lobby, argue, have some fun, but mostly plot about how to convince Ottawa to treat them with more respect. 3 times a year, Bruce edits the Red Duster, a nickname for the Red Ensign, and its pages chronicle their success. Today, some surviving merchant seamen receive pensions, free eyeglasses, and dental work. Bruce is also spearheading a medal campaign.
We'd like to see a medal, what we call a Merchant Seaman's Medal. The British in World War I issued a Merchant Navy Medal. They didn't do that in World War II, and the Canadians also are not doing it.
Medals like the ones he keeps from his father's service at Vimy Ridge 90 years ago. It's where he's heading to right now.
I have to sort of compose myself when I start thinking about it. It's beautiful there now with the rolling hills. It's rolling country and there's green grass. There's the trenches and there's the tunnels that are there, and there are cemeteries. But it's certainly nothing compared to what I heard of when my dad told me, you know.
The trip to Vimy has another purpose as well. The Veterans Affairs Minister has promised to give Bruce a hearing there about creating a medal for merchant mariners. At some point on this weekend, when we remember our war dead, they may find a way to honor the everyday heroes who struggled and sacrificed to give our soldiers a fighting chance.
And that is Global National for Good Friday. We're streaming tonight's broadcast on globalnational.com. I'm Kevin Newman. Thanks for sharing your time with us. Local news is next on most global stations.